in that ancient culture. So big that the way people respond to him when he does is very telling. So if you would, please turn to John chapter 8. I know the handout is very simple, but I figured you can write as much as you want, and then those are your notes. This is 49 to 59, but real quickly, verse 48, Jesus says, the Jews answered him, "Are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon?" Or we said that earlier. The people around him saying, "Hey, you have a demon. You are not a good, quote-unquote, good Jew. You're a Samaritan." And they're really reaching for the worst things that they can call him at this point. And Jesus answered in verse 49, "I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. Yet I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death." The Jews said to him, "Now we know that you have a demon. Abraham died, as did the prophets. Yet you say, if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who died? And the prophets died. Who do you make yourself out to be?" I always think this is funny, because a lot of times people will ask Jesus, "Who do you think you are?" Be very careful when you ask Jesus who you think you are, because then he's going to tell you and you're not going to like it, I think. If you're a Jewish Pharisee, you're just not going to like it. Verse 54, Jesus answered, "If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. But you have not known him. I know him. If I were to say that I do not know him, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad." So he says, hey, if I were to say I didn't know God, I'd be a liar like you are. Right? He's really just putting it on them and saying, you guys are liars, hypocrites. Because you say you know God, and yet you don't know his word well enough to see who I am and to be ready for the Messiah when he comes. Verse 57, so the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham?" Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." Now, I was talking to a Muslim prayer leader in a mosque. He's similar to a pastor at a Muslim worship center, and he was telling me, Jesus never thought he was God. Never. And I said, well, what about this passage here? And he said, well, the Jews just thought he was saying he was greater than Abraham. And I said, well, I don't think that their response tells us that they think he's just saying, well, I'm greater than Abraham. Nah, 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 nah. What he's saying here is that he's God. And how do I know? Look at verse 59. So they picked up stones to throw at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. You don't stone someone for saying that you're better, that I'm better than Abraham. You don't stone me for that. You stone me if I claim to be God in that day. And so Jesus was saying he was God when he said, I am. The Jews understood what he was saying, and that's why they were picking up stones. Turn just over to John chapter 10. We're not going to read this whole passage. But Jesus again claims to be God. And in verse 31, it says this, the Jews picked up stones again to stone him. They must have really liked rock concerts back then. Jesus answered them, I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of them are you going to stone me? Hey, I'm healing people. I'm teaching. What are you going to stone me for? Which one of my good deeds? Verse 33. The Jews answered him, it is not for a good work that we are going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God. They knew exactly what he was saying. When he says in verse 30, I and the Father are one, a lot of people took that to mean, well, a lot of people today want to say, well, that just means they're one in spirit, right? I mean, Pastor Howard and I, we're one as Red Sox fans, right? When I see Dustin Pedroia run out to second base for the Boston Red Sox, we're one. We're one in spirit. That's not what Jesus is saying. How do I know Jesus isn't saying that? Because they're picking up stones to kill him. Because the Jews would have said, oh, well, we're one with God too, in that we follow him. That's not what Jesus is saying. So he's making these claims to be God. Lastly, I'm not going to read through this for time's sake, but in John 18, this is where he's arrested. And as he gets arrested, the soldiers come, and he says, well, who are you looking for? And he says, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus says, I am he, and everybody hits the dirt. Now, I don't know if Jesus was flexing and they were afraid of him. I don't think so. I think they understood when he says, I am he. And by the way, he's not in the English. He's in the English. It's not in the Greek. In the Greek, it just says, I am. They understood that he was claiming to be God at that point. So we have three passages where he's claiming to be the I am, which is the most holy name that the Jews took for God. That's one way that we can see that Jesus was claiming to be God. Number two is that Jesus claimed to be the Son of Man. Jesus claimed to be the Son of Man. This is taken from Daniel. Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming, and he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and kingdom, that all the people, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away. And his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. This phrase, Son of Man, was given messianic rights in a sense. Whenever somebody said, oh, the Son of Man, everybody knew we're talking about the Messiah who was going to be God, who was going to be presented by the Father, or to the Father rather, and given dominion. He was God in human form. This is the phrase, Son of Man, that Jesus uses for himself more than any other phrase. When he talks about himself, who do people say the Son of Man is? He talks about himself in a third person, Son of Man, is what he normally will say. He's not a professional athlete of today who oftentimes they will talk about themselves in the first or in the third person. Famous for that is Ricky Henderson, for those of you who remember Ricky. Ricky would say, Ricky steals bases. He would talk about himself in the third person all the time. Jesus does it because he wants to emphasize who he is before people. So, in Mark chapter 2, if you turn there, please. Extremely famous passage because it really talks from a human standpoint about how we should serve our neighbors. There's the paralyzed man who can't get in to see Jesus. So his friends cut a hole in the roof and lower him down. We can talk about, bearing each other's burdens and all these things. But Jesus, in this passage, really twice makes claims of deity. And so as he's let down in front of Jesus, verse 5, and when Jesus saw their faith, the faith of the people who lower him down, he said to the paralytic, Son, your sons are forgiven. We're going to come back to that in a moment. Now, some of the scribes were sitting there questioning in their hearts, why does this man speak like that? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? And immediately Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they were questioning within themselves, said to them, why do you question these things in your heart? Which is easier to say, your sins are forgiven, or to say, rise, take up your bed, and walk? Now, which one's easier to say? Your sins are forgiven because there's no external evidence for this. So you want to think I'm just blowing smoke and saying, hey, your sins are forgiven, and I'm just blaspheming. Okay, you can think that. But verse 10, but that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. Okay, there's that phrase, Son of Man. He said to the paralytic, I say to you, rise, pick up your bed, and go home. And he rose and immediately picked up his bed and went out before them all, so that they were all amazed and glorifying God, saying, we never saw anything like this. So you want proof? I'm going to just say, Jesus is saying, hey, I've forgiven the guy's sins. You want me to heal him too? Okay, I could do that. It's a proof here for you, because you don't believe who I am. You don't believe who the Son of Man is. And a lot of times we think of the Son of Man as being a human characteristic, that Jesus, yes, he came to earth as a human, and so he's a Son of Man. But really it is more of a deity term because of the passage that we looked at in Daniel chapter 7. So he says this. You want me to prove to you that I'm God? The Son of Man is God. Here, I'm going to heal this man. So he really thinks he's God because he's using the term Son of Man. Number 3, Scott, which is what we looked at. Yeah.
Excuse me. In my commentary it says, regarding Son of Man, Jesus used this term for himself to emphasize his humiliation. Does that mean he's now, as God, he's lowered himself to human form?
Who wrote that commentary? I want to see who I'm
The
going
other
to
Scotsman down the road.
I'm going to say that it wasn't as much for humiliation. Philippians does talk about the fact that Jesus he humbled himself to the point of becoming a human being and then death on a cross. But I'm going to say that the Son of Man, because the passage that we looked at in Daniel, really has to do with him being God incarnate, rather than just emphasizing his humility. Because he talked about himself all that time. Now, if you want to say that he was using the third person to show humility, maybe, but I may not agree with that. Hope I don't get in trouble for that. It's okay. I've been in trouble before, which is why they stuck me into the vice principal role, Steve. Thanks. In Matthew 9, we're not going to turn there just for time's sake, but Matthew 9 is the parallel to the Mark passage. The same passage, or it's the same scenario, paralytics being lowered down, and also in Matthew 9, it says that forgive sins. The people said, well, only God can forgive sins. So Jesus claimed to forgive sins. Who did Jesus think he was? Well, he thought he was God because he was going to forgive sins. You don't just forgive sins let me start again. This is not forgiving sins as when I lose my temper with my kids and I say, Daniel, will you please forgive me for being angry. That's not the forgiveness of sins we're talking about. Jesus is forgiving all of his sins here. Besides, the paralytic man probably hadn't sinned against the human nature of Jesus. He hadn't sinned against the human nature of Jesus, probably. Unless Jesus had passed him on the road and he cursed at Jesus for not healing him or something, right? So this is not Jesus forgiving a personal sin to the human nature of Jesus. This is Jesus forgiving all of his sins. And only, as we saw in the passage, only God can do that. And so the scribes there, the law writers, the people who were the lawyers of the time said, hey, who does Jesus think he is forgiving sins? Only God can do that. So clearly Jesus is claiming to be God when he forgives sin.